furtherance to what we are talking about, real life problems and the solutions, like we have rate and time problems, distance, rate, and time problems. You already know that distance is equal to the rate. Distance is equal to rate. Distance is equal to rate times time. Rate times time. Then the average speed. Average speed. Average speed is equal to the total distance all over the total time. Then total speed all over the, sorry, total distance all over the total time, that's the average speed. Then the average time, is equal to the total distance all over the average speed. The average time is equal to the total distance. Total distance. Total distance over the average speed. So very, very important. Very, very important. So try to master those formulas. Try to always have it at the back of your mind, those formulas. So let's take a simple scenario. Of the simple scenario, copy this question down. Car drove from his home. Car drove from his home to the beach at a speed of 50 minutes per hour. 50 minutes per hour. Car, C-A-R-L, car drove from his home to the beach at a speed of 50 minutes per hour and returned home along the same route. At a speed of 30 minutes per hour. 30 minutes per hour, full stop. If his total driving time for the trip was 2 hours, I think this is at a speed of 30 meters per hour, not minutes, 50 meters per hour and the 30 meters per hour. So let me come again. Car drove from his home to the beach at a speed of 50 meters per hour and returned home along the same route at a speed of 30 meters per hour. Full stop. If his total driving time for the trip was 2 hours, how many hours did he take? Or how many hours, or how many minutes, say how many minutes did it take him to drive from his home to the beach? How many minutes did it take him to drive from his home to the beach? Did you get the question?
Repeat the last sentence.
Let me call the question. Please pay attention. Carl drove from his home to the beach at a speed of 50 meters per hour and returned home along the same route at a speed of 30 meters per hour. If his total driving time for the trip was 2 hours, how many minutes did it take? How many minutes did it take him to drive from his home to the beach, how many minutes did it take him to drive from his home to the beach? Full stop. So how do we go about the question? So the first one is the first thing we should be looking at is the problem asks. What did they ask us to get in that question? They say the problem asks for the time it took for car to drive to the beach. That's the problem. The problem asks for the time it took for car to drive to the beach. That's the question they ask us. Then, so if we start by saying that if t is equal to the time in hours it took for car to drive to the beach, then remember that they say that it took a total of 2 hours in the, so the time 2 minus t is going to give us the time spent for the return trip, because the total time spent for the entire trip is 2 hours. So 2 minus t is going to give us the time spent for the return trip. Then we make a chart. We can make a simple chart. Let me show you. We can make a simple chart to make the question very self-explanatory and easy to solve. So now from the question, we are given that the total time for the entire trip is equal to 2 hours. So for the return trip from or let me say for the return trip, is equal to 2 minus t. If t is equal to the time it takes, t is equal to the time in hours it took to drive to the beach. T is the time it takes to drive to the beach. T is equal to time it takes to drive to beach. So now, if you talk about the going out time, you have the rates. Remember that the rate, if I have this rate is equal to distance the rate is equal to distance over time. And this means that the rate times time is equal to the distance. The reason why I want to make the distance to stand alone is because the distance is the same in the two scenarios. So if I have this simple chart, if you have that simple chart for going out, if this is for going out, and this one is returning. Now, here now for returning, the time, the rate is the rate is 50. That's for going out, the rate is 50. The rate is 50 for going out. Here is rate R. Here is time T. And the rate is 50 and the time is T. So now the distance now D is 50 T. Is 50 T. Then for returning, the rate is 30. The time is 2 minus T. 2 minus T. And the distance now will be equal to 230 into 2 minus T. Simple. So once we form that simple table, so you now notice that 50T now is going to be equal to 30 into 2 minus T. Why? Why that? Is because the distance is the same. Because if you from Port Harcourt to Lagos and from Lagos to Port Harcourt is the same distance you are going to cover. So you don't need somebody to explain that to you. So since the distance is the same, we can simply say that this 50T now, we can simply say that 50T is going to be equal to 30 into 2 minus T. So this means that 50T is equal to 60 minus 30T. 60 minus 30T. So this means that 50 plus 30T, 80T is equal to 60. Therefore, T is equal to 60 over 80. That is equal to 3 over 4. 3 over 4 hours. That's 3 over 4 hours. That's what that means. 3 over 4 hours. So now, that means that it takes car 3 over 4 hours, or 3 over 4 times 60 minutes to drive from his home to the beach. That's what it means. That's what it means. So it takes him 3 over 4 hours. That is 3 over 4 hours. So this implies 3 over 4 times 60 minutes. We want to convert it to minutes. So this and this is 15. Is it 15? Yes, 15. 3 times 15 is 45. So 45 minutes. So it takes him 45 minutes to drive from his home to the beach. So now the return is 2 minus 45 minutes, which is 1 hour, 15 minutes. That's if we are asked to get the time it takes him to the time it takes him to return. That's from the beach, from the beach back to his house. What they ask us in the question is to find, say, how many minutes did it take him to drive from his home to the beach? This is the going out time. Very, very important. So you see how simple and how straightforward that question is. So I'll prefer you just try to master these things, these skills I'm giving you now. Then apply it in most of the word problems, especially the ones that has to do with distance, and this is the best approach to them. And you always get the correct answer.